Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our digital product release Launch and Learn series. Today, we're going to be covering automating release, and we have Colin back as our speaker again. Let's jump in. So before we go further, we have our safe harbor, which you've all seen now many times. But there may be some forward-looking statements in this presentation. They're based on our best understanding at this point in time. So just don't think anything is set in stone, as it could change.
Okay, so hello everybody. This is Colin. For those of you that this is the first time, I'm a part of the inbound team. So I work with our development team on building out these capabilities. And also as a refresher for digital product release, we are currently focused on being more of the process orchestrator around governance, making sure that all of the activities that need to occur have occurred. They've taken place in order to validate that we are ready to release, ready to deploy. And we're going to be focusing on automating that validation today. So that's what we're going to be leaning into. So if we think about the maturity curve that we've reviewed several times, this is basically this third leg, expanding integrations and policy automation. This is by connecting to our CI/CD pipelines to capture additional information that typically occurs within those pipelines for more validation. A question that I sometimes get when we're talking about this kind of data that we're trying to now collect is where should it really reside? So should it be in your CI/CD pipeline? Should it be in the release side? And the answer is effectively both. Your CI/CD pipelines, if you're leveraging them, should do testing. They should do security scans. What release is really doing is taking that data so that we can validate it, that we can authorize it, so that teams don't have to go through additional work in order to kind of collect the evidence to say, yes, we did the activities that are necessary. So as we're going through these policies today and talking through these policies and how they work and how things get wired up so that we can collect this information, I am not saying that you should not do a check for security scans within your pipelines. You certainly should. We are now an additional layer that collects it seamlessly behind the scenes. Teams shouldn't have to do additional work in order to help automate that release readiness validation. So that's what we're really going to be focusing on for today. So let's first talk about our content pack. So with DPR, again, since we are based on policies, and policies are what are used to move from one stage of your release to the next, one phase to the next, we shipped with policies. We actually have two other policies that they're not in the content pack. They come with DPR. They're not a separate install, which is validating tasks, basically just validating that release tasks are done, release approvals are done. But when it comes to data outside of ServiceNow, that's where the content pack comes into play. And so we have things like all of our stories have code commits tied to them. That was actually an early feedback from a DevOps Change customer, actually a while ago, that they just want to make sure that every story that gets worked on has associated code commits. They need it for audit. Or things like all of our planned stories are actually completed. They've been approved by the product owner. So there's nothing that's still in progress, which might mean that it's not time for us to release because not all of our work is done. Code coverage scanning comes up quite a bit. If there's certain thresholds you want to meet, then we pull in data from like SonarQube to get that. And then different kinds of test cases. So we have a generic way of collecting tests and categorizing the automated tests. And I do want to keep, for right now, it's more of automated tests. We can definitely get to manual tests, but there aren't out-of-box integrations for it. That would be something that we could still do to get information. But when we classify those tests, there's usually different thresholds for different kinds of testing. Like unit testing might be at like 100%, but maybe functional testing is at 80% or 90%, something like that. So again, there's lots of data that we are using, and all of this is pulling off of the DevOps data model. So with DevOps Change Velocity, there is behind the scenes a data model with integrations. We are hiding this data model for all intents and purposes. We show you the relevant parts within our dashboards and within different screens of DPR. But behind the scenes, there's a complex data model that associates things like stories, which could be in Jira, with code commits that could be in GitHub. Maybe you're using Jenkins for your CI/CD pipeline, and it's running some unit testing tool or some functional testing tool. And then that's producing different artifacts that are maybe stored in Artifactory. Within the world of DevOps and really just developer tools in general, there are lots of choices, and they're not always aware of each other. So the point of the DevOps data model is to connect to different tools in the developer world, pull that data into ServiceNow and normalize it, and only pulling in relevant information. So for instance, if you have custom fields in Jira that have no impact on your release process, then we don't need that data. We'd only need what is necessary for the release process. So definitely, we don't advocate for bringing in everything. And also, all of this data is in read-only form. So if we do pull in data from Jira, you can't edit it in ServiceNow because it's meant to reflect what's going on in Jira, not as a way to then update it in ServiceNow and push it back into Jira. There are definitely ways of doing that in ServiceNow, but that's not the point for release. We want it to reflect whatever's going on in those external tools. So we connect to those tools, and then we can use the data. Originally with change, we use this data for change authorization. And we're going to get to that in today's session. But release can also use this information to make sure that there are necessary approvals that are in place with necessary data that we can trace to and prove if needed for audit. So as we go through and run these policies, all of the data is stored in ServiceNow in read-only form. And especially if you're using our integrated risk management, you can even use like continuous compliance in order to validate that data to help with your audit process. And then this just comes with the slide that I pulled over. All this information, while being used for release purposes, we also have plenty of metrics that pull from within it. So if you are interested in things like the DORA metrics or the flow metrics, we do include that within release management itself. We also show quality related information so that you have access to that data for use. So because we are using the DevOps Change Velocity, we can use it not only to collect data, but as we get into automating more and more of the release process, the next step after validating that we are release ready is by helping to automate the deployment process. So if you do have a pipeline, a CI/CD pipeline, and when it runs, you want to have a change automatically created. We went through this in a previous session, but I'm going to go over it again in this session since we're covering automation. Then you would be able to orchestrate your change creation, automate it, and have it also look at your release to make sure that everything is good to, again, streamline your deployment process as well. So release readiness we're validating, also deployment authorization, we can automate with the same data. So you don't have to do it once for DevOps and once for release, or like once for change and once for release. We're sharing everything. So you're able to just use this data in multiple ways to help streamline your change and release process. Actually, I will probably come back to this slide. I'm going to switch over into my demo. So I'm going to I'm going to skip back to it, where we can start with reviewing the policies and how we capture build data. And then I'll come back to these slides to talk more about the change automation and change authorization. Before I do that, Greg, are there any chats or Q&A that I should be aware of before I switch over to my instance?
Nope, nothing so far.
Okay. And let's see if I've been logged out. Let's quickly change screens and see if it complains. Okay, I'm still in. Okay, so you should be seeing my screen now. I'm inside of one of our instances, and I am logged in as Aileen, who is a product owner that is managing some releases. So first of all, when we are leveraging the data, and I'm going to focus first on how we leverage it, and then I'll show a little bit about policies. The key thing to note is that we do have to know about your integrations. So if I go into products and we're going to use the FMR loan origination product, there is a screen over here that says external tools. External tools are where we tell this product about the other systems that we're using. So we have going along the top our plans. So plans, right now we have 2 plans connected to FMR loan. We have a Jira project of FMR demo, and we have a GitHub issues that is connected to Joe's FMR repo. So in this case, I have multiple plans. We have one source code repo that we're using, and that's the GitHub FMR repo. We have 2 pipelines that we are leveraging. These are both using GitHub Actions. Again, you could have different pipelines using different tools, and that's fine. And connecting them has 2 parts to it. The part that the product team needs to be mainly aware of is being able to associate and say, these are the pipelines or the repositories that we use. This is going to show across all of them. You'll notice we pull a lot from our demo data, but this will be the list of all pipelines that we are aware of. These are already set up. So the tool to connect to GitHub is already done. If there's questions and we have time at the end, I can certainly go into how these connections are originally set up, but the teams don't set up these connections. The administrators set these up before the teams really get in and start using DPR. So they're able to connect whatever their pipelines are, and then they can, once these connections are set up, we'll start pulling in data. But these are the areas that we look at right now. We look at plans, repositories, pipelines. Test results come from pipelines, so we don't have an additional setup in order to connect your tests. And then we also have artifacts that we connect to as well, which we'll dive into in a moment. But this makes DPR and really ServiceNow in general aware of the plans, repos, pipelines that your teams use. And teams are able to set up this association. So this doesn't have to be done by the admin before onboarding a team. Once the product is in place and the team has access to it, they can manage what their plans are. They should know about their Jira project. They should know about any repos that they use, any pipelines that they use. So we've federated that out to where they can set it up. So once these are set up, we can start using them within our releases. So I'm going to go into our releases and get to actually on my home screen, I've got a closer link to the April FMR early release. So we've been using this demo release for a while, so it is very overdue. It was supposed to be done back in June, but for demonstration purposes, it has a good amount of demo data. It just is telling me, hey, our risk is very high because we have no time remaining. We're overdue, and we have policies failing. We have tasks overdue. There's no way it's getting on time. So there will be a lot of red, but we can still go through the data that we collect. So this particular release has one artifact that it's looking at. So the release artifact is saying that we are tracking this FMR artifact. So if a release is more of the product, the high level of what we're going to be releasing, the artifact is a more detailed, like a jar file or a DLL in Windows or an executable or whatever language you're using, whatever technology you're using. The actual binary itself, that's the artifact. So we track it, we pull it in from the associations that were made earlier. It allows us to track all of the changes that are going through this artifact over time. So this particular artifact has lots of builds that have occurred. You'll see earlier today when testing it out, we ran a build that produced a new version. And so we're tracking that, and we use it in order to start collecting our quality information. So we can see a build from our build pipeline, and we can get to some of the test results. We didn't classify any functional or performance, but we're capturing information that we can see within this quality dashboard. But what we're really going to be focusing is through release execution, where we have policies. So this particular release, when we were setting up its template, has multiple policies that we are checking before we can exit the development phase. These policies, some are compliant, some are non-compliant. Like all of our stories being completed, that's not the case. We have stories associated to this release that are not completed, and therefore we are not compliant, which also means we can't move forward with this phase of our release. We have several that are non-compliant. We have, our stories are not compliant. There are critical vulnerabilities, so that one's not compliant. And then finally, we have this software quality compliance that is also non-compliant. This is the one we're going to use today, and that's because we've actually put into our demo, we've kind of forced the fact that this particular policy will fail on very specific conditions that we can control. So right now, it is non-compliant. So if we were wanting to validate this manually, we'd probably have a task that we had given to somebody to say, tell me that it's compliant. Now, all of our tasks are completed, but we would have assigned a task. That is the way most organizations start. We assign a task to a person. They need to approve the fact that the security scans are within our acceptable range. But wouldn't it be better if we just used data from within the pipeline in order to figure this out? So right now, this is non-compliant. I am going to, Joe, I probably just should have had you, since it takes a couple minutes, run this in the background. But I'm going to run this build. So we have a build that's been kicked off. It takes a moment. So while it runs, I'm going to discuss a couple of things. But this build will now run, and when it's finished, the software quality compliance will switch from being non-compliant to compliant. That's the punchline that you'll get to see in just a moment. But these policies, these are what are used in order to determine, can I move from one phase of this release to the next? And we have built in to DPR a couple of rules in place on the movement from one phase to the next. And it does vary based on, are we using a timeline-oriented release process or a stage-oriented release process? So in the case of timeline-oriented, until the last day, while we're still going to show the status of our policies, we're going to tell you if they're compliant or non-compliant. Until we reach the last day, we're not going to use the status of those to determine whether or not to move to the next phase. So until this one was supposed to be done back in March, so until March 27th, which was the planned end date for the development phase, everything could be compliant on the 26th. But on the 27th, we will use the status of these policies to determine whether or not we can close the deployment phase and move on to the next phase, which was, I think, packaging. Yeah, package, which is a very short phase. So you could be compliant all the way up until the last day, but what matters is what's the results on the last day. And if you're compliant, then we automatically move you to packaging on the 28th. So we would have automatically moved this. And that's because in a timeline-oriented process, you're trying to stick to a timeline. So that's why we wait until the last day. However, in stage-oriented doesn't have the notion of time. Once all of your policies are completed in a stage-oriented, then the stage will move to the next one. There could be multiple movements in a single day. All stage-oriented cares about is that all of your policies are compliant. And if they are, then you can move from one stage to the next. There is no time requirement to move through these policies. And that's really because different organizations work in different ways. For instance, within ServiceNow, we all march to the same drum. We have our August release coming up, and I can't be done early. I can have all of my things done early, but it's going to evaluate based on our timelines. So we don't move forward even if everything looks good, because a new build might make it not good anymore. So that's how we work. But I have several other customers I work with where all right, good, that one's done. Run those policies. Where as soon as the team is ready, they can move forward. So we support both methods of working in order to move from one phase to the next, leveraging these policies. So let's see if, and we now have the magic has happened. The software quality compliance is now compliant because when I ran that last build, it was going to trigger and just show and basically pass this particular compliance. Now, there are others that aren't. Well, I never finished any stories. So this will still be a holdup. I also didn't fix any critical vulnerabilities. So this would still be a holdup. But this last one here is doing it automated. And that, again, our policies run at the very least nightly. You can configure how often they run in the background, or you can trigger a manual check for policies. And now we're doing that without a person having to go find the information, compile it, and attest to the fact that whatever requirements they have been met. So I think I just saw a Q&A pop up. Is there a question, Greg, that I should answer?
It looks like it might have been a typo.
Okay.
Or they hit enter too soon.
No worries. So if there are any questions, because going through, we're going to go into the anatomy of policies in the next session. The next thing I was going to go over was now we have, this part automated. So our readiness checks are automated. Next, I was going to go into the DevOps change piece again to automate the deployment side of release. So if there are any questions people want to put in chat, now is a good time. Otherwise, I will go into DevOps change. Okay. So let me switch back to that PowerPoint and go back. Okay, so DevOps change, which again, DevOps Change Velocity and digital product release do not require each other. They can be implemented independently. They can be implemented together. Obviously, for the full kind of automation, we recommend using them together. but which order you implement, totally up to you. And again, they don't rely on each other. But when we get into saying we have a release that is ready, and we want to automate the authorization of the change based on this data, DevOps Change leverages something released, when was it? Maybe back in Orlando, could have been Madrid. It was a while ago. I worked on it, but now it's been, I think, 5 years, so a little hazy on time. But we introduced change approval policies to help automate the process of saying, do we actually need a person involved in saying the change should move forward? And DevOps data is one of the largest uses of sources of information in order to make that determination. So a approval policy basically says, based on some criteria, do we approve this change? Do we reject this change? Do we send it to a person? Do we send it to a team? Those are all options available, and any data within ServiceNow can be used in order to make that determination. DevOps Change ships with some examples of what to use. Change management ships with some examples of just using change in order to make that determination. But it allows you to use any data in ServiceNow to decide whether or not to auto approve, auto reject, or send it to a person. And what DevOps then adds is the ability to have a dedicated model, dedicated change model that has the specific criteria needed, as well as integrations into your CI/CD tools to actually create the change request itself. And now, since I've already run one pipeline, I'm going to go into GitHub and show a little bit about what that looks like. It is more on the technical side. So this is something that typically development teams who are used to dealing with YAML files or are used to dealing with Jenkins pipeline files, this is something they typically set up. We're going to be going through it because I'm also going to highlight how you would connect, especially if you're already using DevOps Change, how you would connect this with release, because we already have a connection between both change and release for purposes of automating your change process. So they would need to at least make an update to be aware of your release itself. So Greg, I got another pop-up that said there was a Q&A. Is this something I should answer now or answer later?
I think we can do it later. So I'll just read it out. It's about feature toggling within DPR. So maybe we'll save it to the end.
Okay, yeah, that would probably be good to the end.
Yeah.
Okay. Then let's now switch back and talk about how these work. So first of all, I'm going to just, so that I have this to point at, multiple change requests. So there is a dedicated area within DPR that we've gone over before on all of the change requests associated to this release. But when I say it's associated to this release, it's actually a bit of a misnomer, because the relationship between change and release is actually through the version record. So this pre-release 0.9. What we are doing here is saying, show me all of the change requests that are referencing this pre-release 0.9 version of FMR loan. So by doing that, it allows us to tell the change what about the CI is changing instead of saying what release it is. So we're actually associating a version to the change. And since the release knows what version that it is trying to validate, we can pull all of those change records in here. The reason that's important is because that is how, when we automate change, that's actually what we need to connect to the change record in order to pull it in here. So you'll see we have several automated deployments. Have deployment very clever naming system when I open manual changes. So instead of doing the new button to create a change, because you could have many change requests for this release. Maybe you have change requests for pre-production that you want to leverage. Actually, there's one customer I was working with that one of their policies is that there must be change requests that are closed complete before they can do a deploy to prod. So that's not an out-of-box policy right now because I've only had one customer, give that as an example. But that's an example of leveraging changes that are still a part of the release, but are for earlier stages of your development in order to say whether or not we can authorize a change to prod. They want to make sure that it's successfully deployed in pre-prod first. Or you might have different locations that you deploy to. If you have, in the DevOps world, you might hear the term blue-green, where you will have two different kind of data centers, and you'll deploy to one of them and update, and then kind of fail everybody over to the previous one while an upgrade's going on. And then once the upgrade's completed, you fail everybody back over, and then you might deploy that version to the other data center. So in that case, we're deploying to two different data centers. We should probably have two different change requests to manage it. So there are lots of reasons why you would have multiple change requests for a release. And you always have access to this new button to create it. But wouldn't you prefer for the change request to just kind of get created for you without having to, manually collect all of the data that is needed for that particular change? So that's where DevOps Change comes in. So if I change over real quickly, you'll see I have my build pipeline, and then I have a deploy pipeline. The deploy pipeline fails a lot because we're not trying to do an actual deployment. Succeeds a couple of times. And that's because within the deployment pipeline itself, if the change gets rejected, then the pipeline will fail, which could stop an actual deployment going on. So if you raise the change, wait for its authorization, once it's authorized, then it deploys. That's a great check to have in your deployment pipeline so that you make sure that they're authorized and it's built right into the deploy pipeline. So deployment can't happen if the change is not authorized. And the way that happens, again, now we're going to go into a YAML file, is by adding some pieces into whatever build system you're using. Like this particular one is using a ServiceNow registering a package. So it's using this particular register package. Action, I think, is what GitHub Actions calls it. So this particular action, and there's some tokens and there's some data that has to be passed in to say what artifacts are part of this package. And then later, with the change itself, we're saying, okay, now run a DevOps change. We're going to use the DevOps change action, and we are going to specify what, close this so I get a little bit more screen real estate. We're going to specify things like what is the short description, like what needs to go into the change request itself. Let me scroll over. This can also use dynamic information from your pipeline. So this particular one, you'll see back here, we have a different build number, so 0.9.61. The reason why it changes automatically is because it's specifying here that we're going to use the GitHub version, so the build number, as a part of the short description for the change. You can do the same thing with description itself. You can do things like give your implementation plan. But the part, if I scroll over really far, this part right here at the end, the software model, let me see if I can make that bigger so that everybody can see it. That's better. So the last thing that we just have to make sure to include as a part of all the other things you want filled out is what software model are we using? So that's the version of our product. And the one we want to use is the summer, the FMR summer patch. That's the 0.9 that will get kicked off. Actually, this might have been updated, so it's not. If I ran this would actually do a different version. But when you're specifying which version you want to run, this right here is basically saying what we're associating to the release. So if I were to hit play and it were to create the change request, what happens back in ServiceNow is that a change is raised. All of the fields that you'll see on this change request were specified by that pipeline. So we'll see that the category set, the software model, this was back before we changed it, was the 0.9. We have the configuration item that we're working with. We have the short description. All of the information is coming from the pipeline, although you can do further iterations on this data once it gets to ServiceNow. And everything gets filled out. It's filled out the same way every time. There are several times that I've worked with organizations where I've asked them, what is like a good change look like? What does a good change look like? Can you show me an example? And then they pull up their change requests and people have they filled in all the required fields, but it's not necessarily good or useful data. Well, by putting it into your pipeline, it's repeatable, it's high quality data, it's using data in context to fill out the dynamic portions, and a person didn't have to spend a lot of time doing it. It also will start connecting other information, so the change team will also have access. This one only has some code commits, so I could see what code commit was involved. If there were test results that we were capturing when this one ran, I just pulled a random one, so of course it doesn't have a lot of data. But if it had additional like test summary information or quality summaries, all that gets added to the change record. So not only are we automating the creation, we're also automating the authorization, and we're giving visibility automatically to the change, to whomever looks at this change request, to get to the details about why this change was authorized.
What hey, Colin, I actually just kicked off that deployment for the new build you created, 2.2.182, and that does indeed show up under the summer patch release. So.
Okay, which that was summer.
Yeah.
Which one was it, Joe?
Oh, it's H22024. So
let me clear out the.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It was
H2, this one.
Yeah, that one. Yeah. Yep.
All right. So let's go into the change requests here. So there's the build, for 182. And let's see if it's got some, this one has some data. So this one has, here are the test summaries that occurred. So we can see 100% passing. There were 12 tests. We can see the quality scan that occurred. We can drill into more details about this scan. We also have access to the one story that was worked on. So all of this information was captured automatically and presented to whomever is needing access to it, whether it's for further review or for audit. We create this traceability for you to help automate this change and release process. So in the Q&A itself, if there are additional questions, because this is what I always like to make sure that I've got time to answer any questions that come up during. Remember, for the next week's session is an office hours. So we'll be on to answer questions. If you have questions about implementation, or you're trying things out, or you're having an issue, that's the point of next week's. But the one after, we're going to go into the details, and it'll be a little more on the technical side, because we're going to go into the details and anatomy of the policies, so that if you needed to make your own policies, you would know how to do it. But any questions today, go ahead and start loading them into Q&A, and I'll start answering them.
At this point, folks can just raise their hand if they have questions, and we can have them come off mute as well.
Yeah, so since we're there was one that we had about feature flags that we were wanting to discuss. So depending on when we talk about feature flags actually have a tie-in conceptually to our product features. So right now, the majority of customers that I work with, when they're trying to validate, readiness, it's readiness about a particular build artifact. So like I just had build 182, we were validating build 182. That was what we were validating. But with organizations that are doing continuous deployments, and actually the last company I worked for, they were a continuous deployment shop. So we deployed multiple times a day. However, those deployments were behind feature flags, and therefore, customers couldn't access them. We actually released quarterly, even though we deployed multiple times a day. So this is sometimes a misconception about continuous delivery versus release. You can still release on whatever cadence you want, even if you're deploying multiple times. And what's important is that these features, which would be tied to feature flags, are what you are validating. So in that case, I don't have any policies right now, and I'm really interested if this is something that you're doing, because I want to learn more about customers that are using feature flags, because we do have integrations with Split.io to capture feature flag information, possibly others, but I remember Split.io, because we can use that to, instead of validating that a binary is good, we can actually use the same concept, like getting feature flagging, telemetry, things like that, to say, are these features that we are planning to release ready? So it's less about, is the binary ready, and more about, are the features ready, leveraging the same concepts we went over today, leveraging telemetry from those feature flags, leveraging tests from those feature flags, leveraging any other information that you're capturing. So we'd just be looking at, instead of validating an artifact, we'd be validating these. So it's definitely possible. So on the feature flagging, if there is if the person has more information, and we have enough time, does that help on feature flagging and how we look at it, and how release supports it, even if you're deploying multiple times a day? It's an interesting topic.
If we can, on the next one, we have a hand up. So John, do you want to come off mute?
Sure. Yeah, hey, I was John. Just you were discussing back. This is from a little bit further back. This tool I'm looking at from a testing perspective is Q-Test. Is that something that's already integrated into, or we can make the connections, or is that it is a Tricentis tool, and I did see that you are supporting Tricentis, but I was just wondering if you have that.
Yeah, Tricentis, they built that integration. So it's not owned by ServiceNow, but they do have that integration on their end for bringing. Yeah,
that's kind of what I figured. I just didn't know if you had that information here. But okay, thanks.
Yep. But it works the same way. So
right.
Yeah, and any test results that report back to a pipeline tool, so like Jenkins or Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions, we pick up those results from the pipeline. So if you have a plugin that reports the results to the pipeline, we don't have to directly talk to the testing tool to get the results. We'll get it from the pipeline.
Okay, yeah, and you kind of answered the question. That was really what the question was. Do you know if Tricentis has built that functionality? And it sounds like, yeah, they have. So, okay.
Yep. Yeah, we actually demonstrated that not at the last Knowledge. They had a session, I think, in Knowledge of 23, where they demonstrated that integration with DevOps Change Velocity. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
And just to reiterate, any integration with DevOps Change Velocity, as far as test results or security scans or quality scans, that would be available for policies within digital product release. It's the same underlying data model that we're referencing with those queries.
Yeah, and then also if there's any integration that you have into a different area of ServiceNow, but that you need to use it as a part of release, then our policy engine can definitely access it. We'd have to figure out how we discover which records to look at. But so long as there is a consistent way of finding information for that particular release, then our policies can access it. There are even ways of accessing data that doesn't live in ServiceNow. It's more advanced.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, I figured I assumed that, but yeah, if we had custom tables as well, we would have to look into that as well.
Exactly.
It's just that, yeah.
It looks like we have a question from Pamela. You can come off mute and.
Looks like. Okay.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yep. No,
Yeah.
you're good.
So you just mentioned what I wanted to ask, and I did put something in the chat related to it. For us, we're trying to leverage ServiceNow, right? From the product management as well as test management. And it sounds like you're evaluating test management, how much integration you're going to have. So, and we do use DevOps, right? But my question is, like you said, you can tap in, we can get to any of that data, but how easy is it going to be for us to do that if it's not out of the box, right? If I want to get to stories from product management and using Agile 2.0 and also test management 1.0, how easy is it going to be for us to get this data to then be able to leverage DPR?
So Agile 2.0, and actually by extension into test management 2.0, we already have integrations set up, and we integrate with Agile 2.0. We treat it like an integration because we wanted to have kind of a clean way where we interact with every tool. The integration is a little stronger with Agile 2.0, but you can set that up. So when I'm, let me change to being, let me change real quick. When we are setting this, setting DPR up, we have tools that we set up. And when you connect a tool, one of the planning tools is Agile 2.0. So once Agile 2.0 is set up, then we can pull in stories from Agile 2.0 the same way we do with everything else.
All the, okay.
And Agile 2.0 has references to test management 2.0, not 1.0,
right.
2.0.
I know.
I will go ahead and apologize. I am the reason for test management 2.0. I then changed roles to start work on DevOps, and nobody picked it up from me. So I am somewhat to blame for that transition. That being said, we are kind of investigating. This is not near term on my roadmap, but the SPM team really wants me to take test management because we get more requests for test management in support of release than we do test management generally. So it is definitely an area I'm looking at to bring, to potentially bring. Again, I have so many things on my backlog. We're balancing out what order we do stuff. But I'm getting this request more often where we need testing built in to DPR. So I wouldn't be surprised if that gets prioritized in. And do you use it mostly for release testing or testing more broadly?
Yeah, we use we use Test Management 1.0 because it works, and we haven't had a need to move to 2.0 unless the only way we're going to be able to get to this is through Agile 2.0 and Test Manager 2.0 that way, right? But the process we have in place works, and we have automated test results that come into ServiceNow from other tools as well, and like Certify will pull in and use the test plans and the test case instances and automatically execute those. And then we have a bunch of manual tests that happen with, we have monthly releases and then major releases. And then that is a key requirement. You have to have a test plan that's signed off in order for you to be able to go to production, right? So that's one of our key requirements. And we pull everything together on what we call a release package, which uses the RM release table. So, you know, it's very similar to where this is going. And we do want to move to more out of the box, because when we implemented it 10 years ago, you didn't have some of the things that we already had. But you guys are, you know, we want to get there, but it also has to be a step approach, right? So first we have to get the common service data model is where but we're looking at out of the box change models, DPR, you know, and other things. So it's just a lot to get there. And Test Management 1.0 works for us. So there's like zero reason for us to move to 2.0 at this point, except the fact that all your new stuff doesn't automatically integrate. So that's my struggle, is how do I get to DPR and not change everything at once? Because, you know, that's not practical to be able to do that. So if I wanted if I want test results from Test Management 1.0, it would have to be able to create a policy to do that, right? So.
And my recommendation for that, the simplest way, is to, on your test plan, add a reference to the software model table. Because the easiest way to create a policy would be to say, what are the test plans that look at this version? So if we were, you know, looking at that this release was for, you know, pre-release 0.9. If your test plan said this is a test plan for pre-release 0.9, we'd be able to very easily get to that data. So that's probably the easiest way. And maybe I'll even use that as an example in our next session on advanced automation when you're building policies, because that's probably going to be the easiest way to do that.
And if we can do that, that's great, because at the end of the day, we have test stuff going on in DevOps too. But at the same time, there's still, you know, a lot of manual testing going on, and we need to get to it. And it's within ServiceNow, so I should be able to get to it, right? It's great we can get to all these other tools, and that's where the industry is. But, you know, I want to get to what I have in ServiceNow too. So that's really helpful. So I jotted that down. Thank you very much.
No worries. And you've given me a good inspiration for a policy to make next time.
Great. I'll be there.
I know that we're at time. I can stay a little bit longer if there are any last minute questions that we want to get to. Otherwise, again, next week's session is just open office hours. So you can come ask any questions there as well. But if there's something that we want to get to at the moment, I can stay for a couple more minutes if needed. But if not, then I hope everyone has a good rest of their day, and I'll see you at the next session.
Thanks, everyone.
I do have one other thing.
Sure.
So we actually implemented, it's been a few years, using the ServiceNow API to create changes automatically from Azure DevOps and to close them, just like you said. So with the YAML pipelines. So is it recommended that we use this method, this new method that you were showing today? Well, it's new to me, right? But to switch over to using this first, because the API just creates the change. Again, if it's pipeline successful, it'll close it. If it's, you know, if it fails, it'll put, you know, why it failed. And, you know, we try and create that same data, like you said. And so for non-prod, we just auto approve them. But for prod, we didn't put the automation in for prod, right? You know, I like where everything's going with these policies. We haven't done that yet, but we auto approve and auto close changes, you know, from those pipelines.
Yeah. So ours, you can think of as we support it. So
Mhm.
you don't have to kind of deal with that aspect of it.
Okay.
Ours has two portions to it. One is that it creates the change. It can also hold the YAML pipeline until such time as it is actually authorized. So if it's not auto authorized and it does need to hold for a person, I'd recommend you have SLAs that say someone's got to get to it rather quickly to say yes or no. But at that point, it'll hold until the change is authorized and then sends it, continues the pipeline. So it can be used to not only create the change, but to wait pending approval for that change before it deploys. So we support both methods there. And again, we maintain it so you don't have to. If your
Yeah,
system's working, I'm not saying you
Mhm.
have to move,
Right.
but again, you don't have to
You
worry
maintain
about
it.
the
Yeah.
maintenance. Right.
Yeah. So we won't, the pipeline can't run if there's not an authorized change, right? So when you're auto creating the change at the time you run the pipeline, it's going to be all fine. But we didn't automate prod in the same way because you can't you're not running the pipe, you're getting that authorized prior to running the pipeline. So if we release on a Saturday, we're approving those changes like Thursday and Friday, like the final approvals, because we haven't gotten to the full auto approving of the prod changes yet. So we can't leverage that automation for prod because people need to approve it, right?
Right. Okay.
And so if you want to release at 8 a.m. on Saturday, you can't auto create that prod one. So that's kind of what we've done. But the pipeline can't go if you don't have an authorized change, in cases where even if we don't create the change, we have like a check that goes into ServiceNow and looks for the product or the CI and says, do I have an authorized change in this current time within that window, right? We do have all that validation in place because even before ServiceNow, we did stuff like that. So it can't go if the change is improved. And if you missed your window, oh, well, you got to get another change authorized. So we do have that automation built in, but I'm going to tell our cloud enablement team who supports the whole gate that we created for the ServiceNow piece here with changes about this. So that's good stuff. So I assume there's information out this in your product documentation too.
Yes. So it's a part of DevOps Change Velocity, and
DevOps
it
Change
includes,
Velocity,
and we support Azure DevOps. I did GitHub Actions today, but we do support Azure DevOps and many others.
Okay. Yeah. So they work with our ServiceNow developers to integrate and do all that stuff. So I'll let them know about it because maybe it's something that we can leverage then. Okay, that's all I wanted to ask. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.